Salvete omnes, and welcome to our virtual lecture on Wheelock Chapter 33, Conditions. Conditional sentences are some of the most common sentences in Latin. They consist of two clauses. The first is the condition, or protasis. This is a subordinate clause, usually introduced by si, which means if, or nisi, which means if not or unless. It states a hypothetical action or circumstance that affects the outcome of the main clause. The main clause is called the apodosis and is the conclusion of the conditional. It expresses the anticipated outcome if the premise in the protasis turns out to be true. In Latin, there are 6 basic types of conditions. 3 have verbs in the indicative, which are those where the condition was more likely to be realized. The other 3 have verbs in the subjunctive, which are those where the premise was less likely to happen, or where both condition and conclusion were contrary to the actual facts of the situation. As mentioned before, there are 3 indicative conditions. The simple fact present condition has present indicative verbs in both the subordinate clause and the main clause. Both verbs are translated as present indicatives. It indicates a factual relationship between protasis and apodosis happening in the present. The sample sentence, si id facit prudens est, if he is doing this, he is wise, represents a situation where if the subject is in fact doing the indicated action, he is in fact wise. The simple fact past condition has past tense, imperfect or any verbs in the perfect system, verbs, in both subordinate clause and main verb. Both verbs are translated as past indicatives. It indicates a factual relationship between protasis and apodosis that happened in the past. The sample sentence, si id facit prudens fuit, if he did this, he was wise, represents a situation where if the subject did in fact do the indicated action, then he was in fact wise. The simple fact future condition, also known as the future more vivid and abbreviated FMV, has future indicative verbs in both the subordinate clause and the main clause. In these conditions, you translate the verb in the protasis, if clause, as present, since in English, if plus the present has a future sense, and the verb in the apodosis, the main clause, as future. It represents a factual relationship between protasis and apodosis that is very likely to happen in the future, hence why it is more vivid. The sample sentence, si id faciet prudens erit, if he does this, he will be wise, represents a situation where if the subject will in fact do the indicated action in the future, then he will in fact be wise. In addition to the 3 indicative conditions, there are also 3 subjunctive conditions. The first is the contrary to fact, CTF present. It represents a relationship between subordinate clause and main clause that is the opposite of what is happening in reality. Both the protasis and the apodosis have imperfect subjunctives. In this instance, the imperfect subjunctive in the protasis, the si clause, is translated as were verbing, and the imperfect subjunctive in the apodosis, the main clause, is translated as would be verb. This can be seen in the example sentence, si id facerit prudens esset. If he were doing this, he would be wise. The relationship between the 2 verbs tells us that he is not in fact doing this, and therefore he is not in fact wise, the opposite of reality. The second subjunctive conditional is the contrary to fact, CTF past. It represents a relationship between subordinate clause and main clause that indicates the opposite of what happened in the past in reality. Both the protasis and the apodosis have pluperfect subjunctives. The pluperfect subjunctive in the protasis, the if clause, is translated as had verbed, and the pluperfect subjunctive in the apodosis, the main clause, is translated as would have verbed. This can be seen in the sample sentence, si id fecissent prudens fuisset. If he had done this, he would have been wise. The relationship between the 2 verbs tells us that he did not in fact do this, so he was not in fact wise. Finally, the third subjunctive condition is the future less vivid, FLV, which represents a relationship between the subordinate clause and main clause that is somewhat less likely to be realized than a future more vivid. Both the protasis and the apodosis have present subjunctives. The present subjunctive in the protasis, the if clause, is translated as should verb, and the present subjunctive in the apodosis, the main clause, is translated as would verb. Because of this, it is sometimes known as the should-would conditional. This can be seen in the sample sentence, si id faciat prudens sit. If he should do this, he would be wise. The relationship between the two verbs tells us that he is not very likely to do the indicated action, and therefore he is not very likely to be wise. Now we're going to look at a few sample sentences. I will put up the sentence on the screen and give you a few moments to figure out the tense and mood of both the verbs in the clauses to guess at what type of conditional it is. Feel free to pause if you need a little more time. Then I will give you the right answer and tell you why, and give you a translation of the sentence. Grab a piece of paper and let's get started. What type of conditional is represented by the sentence si hoc dicet erabit? If you guessed simple fact future or future more vivid, you were correct. Since both the verb in the protasis and the verb in the apodosis are future indicatives, this condition has to be a simple fact future or future more vivid. It is translated as, if he says this, he will be wrong, because as we just learned, the future verb in the protasis of an FMV is translated as indicative. What type of conditional is represented by the sentence si hoc dicet erat? If you guessed simple fact present, you were correct. Since both the verb in the protasis and the verb in the apodosis are present indicatives, this condition has to be a simple fact present. It is translated as, if he says this, he is wrong. What type of conditional is represented in the sentence si hoc dixisset era wisset? If you guessed contrary to fact past, you were correct. Both the verb in the protasis and the verb in the apodosis are pluperfect subjunctives, and therefore this condition has to be contrary to fact past. It is translated as, if he had said this, he would have been wrong. What type of conditional is represented by the sentence si hoc dicet erit? Dicat erit. If you guessed future less vivid, you were correct. Since both the verb in the protasis and the verb in the apodosis are present subjunctives, this condition has to be a future less vivid. Since this conditional is also known as the should-would conditional, it is translated as, if he should say this, he would be wrong. What type of conditional is represented by the sentence si hoc dicet eravit? If you guessed simple fact past, you are correct. Since both the verb in the protasis and the verb in the apodosis are perfect indicatives, this conditional has to be simple fact past. It is translated as, if he said this, he was wrong. What type of conditional is represented by the sentence si hoc diceret eraret? If you guessed contrary to fact present, you were correct. Because the verb in the protasis and the verb in the apodosis are both imperfect subjunctives, this condition has to be a contrary to fact present. It is translated as, if he were saying this, he would be wrong. What type of conditional is represented by the sentence si videat hoc videat? If you guessed future less vivid, you were correct. Because both the verb in the protasis and the verb in the apodosis are present subjunctives, this condition has to be a future less vivid. It is translated as, if he should come, he would see this. What type of conditional is represented by the sentence, si venet hoc videt? If you guessed simple fact past, you were correct. Because both the verb in the protasis and the verb in the apodosis are perfect indicatives, this condition has to be a simple fact past. It is translated as, if he came, he saw this. What type of conditional is represented by the sentence, si venire hoc videret? If you guessed contrary to fact present, you were correct. Because both the verb in the protasis and the verb in the apodosis are imperfect subjunctives, this conditional has to be a contrary to fact present. It is translated as, if he were coming, he would see this. What type of conditional is represented by the sentence, si veniet hoc videbit? If you guessed simple fact future, or future more vivid, you were correct. Because both the verb in the protasis and the verb in the apodosis are future indicatives, the conditional has to be a FMV. It is translated as, if he comes, he will see this, because as we just learned, the future verb in the protasis of an FMV is translated as indicative. What type of conditional is represented by the sentence, si venisset hoc vidisset? If you guessed contrary to fact past, you were correct. Since both the verb in the protasis and the verb in the apodosis are pluperfect subjunctives, the condition has to be a contrary to fact past. It is translated as, if he had come, he would have seen this. I hope this was a helpful exercise, even remotely, and as per usual, please don't hesitate to reach out with any questions. As we have seen with many other constructions in Latin, conditionals also do not always follow these strict rules. Sometimes there are different tenses and moods in the protasis or apodosis. This is what is known as a mixed conditional. For example, you could assert that if someone had worked in the past, although he never worked at all, and had not been paid, he would still expect to be paid in the present. You could express that conditional statement with a past contrary to fact protasis and a present contrary to fact apodosis. The scenario can be seen in the sentence, si labora viset pecuniam optaret. The pluperfect subjunctive of the protasis indicates that it is a past contrary to fact, while the imperfect subjunctive of the apodosis is from a present contrary to fact. This would be translated as, if he had worked, he would ask for money. If you were to see one of these in a parsing, identifying, translating sentence, you would need to identify what type of conditional each clause is coming from. Just seeing mixed conditional is not enough. Now I just want to give a quick note on some vocab from today's list. Usually, the Latin indefinite pronoun is aliquis, aliquid, and it means anyone, anything, someone, something. However, after si, nisi, num, and ne, all the allies run away. This means that when you see a form of quis, quid, and any of its declined forms, after these four words, it is probably an indefinite, meaning anyone or anything, not an interrogative, meaning who or what. If you think about it, this makes sense, as if who does this does not make any sense. Now let's do a practice sentence together. Si quis bonos mores habuit, eam laudavimus. Let's start with finding all of our verbs. There are two. The first, in the protasis, is habuit. It is a third-person singular perfect active indicative. The second, in the apodosis, is laudavimus. It is a first-person plural perfect active indicative. Because both of our verbs are perfect active indicatives, this means we have a simple fact past conditional. Let's start with the rest of the protasis first. It is introduced by the conjunction C. The subject is quis, which is the masculine nominative singular of the indefinite pronoun, not the interrogative. Remember, after si, nisi, num, and ne, all the allies run away. The direct object of habavit is the masculine accusative plural mores, which is modified by the masculine accusative plural adjective bonos. In the apodosis, the subject of laudavimus is implied in the verb, we. Eum, as the accusative masculine singular of is ea id, is the direct object of laudavimus. When we put this all together, the sentence is translated as, if anyone had good morals, we praised him. That's all for this chapter. Please be sure to complete your forum sentence for this chapter by the end of the day tomorrow, March 19th, and turn in your Chapter 33 worksheet by the end of the day Friday, March 20th. You should also prep for the quiz that will become available on Friday at 10:10 a.m. You have until the end of the day to finish it. Don't forget that Friday at 10:10 a.m. is also when we will have our first optional Zoom question session, followed by sight reading of one of my favorite poems. If you have any questions, please email me so I can answer via email or schedule a Zoom session with you or whatever you need. Valete omnes.